Welcome everyone to Plants to Plants Cannabis Processing Talks for our episode 20. I'm very excited. This week we have Darwin Fletcher from Global Cannabis Executive Summit, the CANEXEC, an amazing, really high level cannabis event for executives at the leading international, national brands and operating companies worldwide. This is truly one of the highest level, most impactful rooms I've ever been in with cannabis executives myself. So it was really a great opportunity to bring Darwin in to speak about his experience in this specific event space, but then all the information he's gleaned over the years about the global cannabis market trends and where we're heading next. So Darwin, welcome to Plants to Plants. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Emmett. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Darwin, what can you tell us about your background? How did you get into the cannabis space and in event promotion and linking up high-powered executives?
For sure, Emmett. Yeah, so I've been in the event business now for close to 15 years, and at some of these events that I was a part of and hosting them, especially in the manufacturing space, I was able to meet some executives that eventually transitioned into cannabis. They went from selling candies or manufacturing candies or creams and pharmaceutical products to beverage, especially alcohol, to being at the heads of cannabis companies, at the largest cannabis companies, especially the Canadian ones like Canopy and Aurora and Hexo. And they were still coming to the events for food manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, discrete manufacturing even. And I saw that there was a demand for this type of a format for cannabis executives because nothing like it existed. So that's really how I got into the cannabis industry. My background is in the events business, and I've been part of that for a while. Prior to that, it was investment banking, which led me into the events business because when you do investment research, you learn about new industries and you develop a curiosity about what's going to be next and growth and all those aspects of it. So it just makes it that much more exciting. But I'm happy to be a part of the cannabis industry. I'll tell you that it's a very dynamic industry versus some of the other ones. I always try to find a comparison for my team that we're working on this event, and it's very difficult. There's nothing like it. It's so novel. It's so new, and the growth is exponential, to say the least, and the potential for growth. I don't know another industry that has this kind of potential for growth.
It's really interesting to hear you speak specifically to how you actually came into the cannabis space by knowing executives coming from other industries. It's a very sort of uniquely Canadian perspective, I would say, in particular with the federal legalization, when you've had a fully legal market for the longest out of any country other possibly than Uruguay about the same time. So, how has sentiment changed over time? I mean, were these people jumping right into the cannabis space from day one, or were they sort of brought in by investors trying to really gain a traction in the market? How did that work out?
For sure, that's an excellent question, Emmett, and something that I've become much more conscious of as well. It's the human factor. Like, where did these people come from? What is their motivation? Why are they here? And I can tell you that just from what I've seen, sitting at this front row seat of this amazing game, is the people have changed, and the collection of people. I think the people that are here today and that are succeeding were here a long time ago, even before legalization, really. But some of them are coming from the what they call the legacy market. But a lot of them are just very passionate about the industry, and they're more optimistic about the future than they were, say, 3 years ago or 2 years ago even. I think in the beginning, a lot of people were brought in from other industries because they saw a potential hot new market, a new industry, an opportunity to catapult to the forefront of the corporate ladder, even at companies that were at one-time billion-dollar companies. And so you had a big mix of people that I would say were more career-oriented or oriented around pumping up the stock price, and then maybe making an exit. But I think now we're dealing with a culture of individuals that are more focused on the long term, focused on innovation, for example, and creating good products. But really innovation, I would say that's something that has really stood out to me, which makes making a program easier because you have people who want to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. The demand for, networking and staying on the cutting edge of both the technology, but also the business environment and the new ways partnerships are being done. International deals are increasingly becoming very important. So amazing to get in there in the CANEXEC space and be able to have these kinds of conversations, which we're facilitating. How many years has this event been going on? You mentioned you've been seeing some of these folks grow.
This is the fourth year, Emmett.
Mm-hmm.
Fourth year. We tried to do it in 2020. Obviously, with COVID, we were unable to deliver a live event, and this event only works live. But so yes, it's been 4 years that we've been meeting.
Right. So a really time of great change for so many reasons. You mentioned, of course, COVID that had a major impact on cannabis space in all kinds of ways, workplace environments, an uptick in consumption in some areas, and then changes in product preference, all kinds of dynamics emerging during that time. What can you tell me about the difference that you've seen from the events of this year, or what you're talking to with people last year and the first year you started? Has there been any major changes in priorities that you're hearing among the movers and shakers?
100%, Emmett. I think the biggest switch is a focus on a pioneering industry and just spending to a focus on saving money and being more conservative and focusing on margins. I think the margin factor is the biggest focus. Now they're focused on profitability and cash flow. I think before, in the beginning, there was a lot of cash flow and a lot of investors were very excited. I think sentiment around the prospect was much higher as well. And once again, it was new, it was novel, and a lot of money was rushing in. And there's other economic factors at play as well, of course, macro themes, but overall, I think people are now more focused on being profitable from an operational standpoint, and then innovation with a focus on profitability as well. Like, how do we make products that people are going to buy and that are going to be high margin for us? Which leads to obviously the extract story, right? And this is a big theme in this year's event and I think last year's event as well, which is going from a commoditized flower to a finished CPG type product. And that's really where that brand differentiation and the ability to charge margins is going to be able to be present. I think you have to have a brand to be able to have good margins. And I think that's what everybody feels, not myself, but that's what everybody really is going after.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting to see these conversations taking place on an international stage and on a national federal legal market stage, because these are things we've been talking about for years and years. As a company, has always been core to our ethos at SciPhy Systems, trying to bring down costs and really focus on operating expenditures, cost to manufacture products. In our conversations with Canadian companies, this has become the question for them. There's really two major priorities. One is bring the cost to manufacture down, and two is managing the upfront capex, of course, because the investment dollars are becoming a little more tight. They're becoming a little more focused on getting towards profitability rather than just being in this growth stage. So definitely mirrors our experience of conversations we're having with Canadian companies, and also just companies across the market, because it is a maturing industry, and more and more they want to see stable businesses. I think investors are ready for this to be a matured, normalized market. And that being the case, of course, the big question that we're getting is, what does this look like moving from a national to an international stage? We're going to hand over to Steve here in a little bit to dig in deep on that question in particular. But just talking to the longest standing contacts that you've had from the events and previous, would you say that the sentiment around the Canadian market and then Canadian company sentiment towards the US market in particular views it as being like saturated? Are they considering this to be a mature market, or is there still growth to be had, or is this purely brand versus brand competition now on the stage of these two national markets that are side by side but so different from each other?
For sure, for sure. I think that's a big talk as well, and a theme of the agenda this year as well. Looking at, is the Canadian market saturated? Is the U.S. market saturated? And then let's go to Europe, right? That's where everyone wants to go now. A lot of people, I should say, want to go there, but at the same time, there are a lot of companies that are finding that the Canadian market isn't saturated, or at least that's what they're telling me. So a lot of CEOs, heads of operations, CFOs, they're telling me that there's still a lot of opportunity in both markets, Canadian market and the U.S. market as well. I think one thing is for sure, everybody would like the U.S. to open up federally, and everyone would like that to be a new market for potential imports and exports. I think it could go both ways, right? I think I'm starting to see some U.S. brands come here and enter the stores at least. I don't know how well they're doing. I'd love to talk to them, but I know that they're providing opportunities for contract manufacturers here that do come to the event, and I do speak to. I know they'd love to have some more brands to manufacture for, but yeah, I think it's interesting. The majority of people do view some of the markets in the U.S. as saturated as well, for sure. Like California, for example, I know that gets mentioned as a saturated market, or New York now, I hear, or Michigan, but Florida. But at the same time, a lot of people, I think, see that there is still opportunity in the saturated market. Brand versus brand, for sure, that is looking like what it is a lot. And you see that competition for sure. But I think you're also seeing some new business models emerge, like the contract manufacturers. I think it's interesting to see how much more contract manufacturers come to my event this year versus the first year, and how that business model is proving to be successful. So it'll be interesting, yeah. And I don't know. There's a lot of companies that are coming and going. There's a lot of consolidation. I mean, I see that firsthand. So I don't know if it's saturated or not. The majority of people would say it is.
Yeah, you mentioned consolidation. I mean that's obviously in a highly competitive market like this. Mergers and acquisitions tends to really heat up and make some big changes to the market landscape. Is that something that you think is on the forefront of investors' minds at this point, or are investor sentiment really shifting towards trying to back companies that are going to be buying other companies, acquiring hot brands, that type of thing, or is there still money going into building fundamentals and staying narrow focused on single brand, single company strategies?
I think there's a mix. I think there are people that are looking for, from the investment community at least the people I talk to, are looking for companies with good, strong fundamentals that maybe have a good product, they have a good innovation pipeline, and they have a good, solid team. And I think there's that shift on focus now where investors are more careful for sure. But at the same time, I think chasing the next acquisition is definitely a story people are looking for. And I think there's a lot of potential in that as well, because I think there's a lot of companies looking to acquire, and I think there's going to be more of that. From what I hear, there's going to be a lot more for sure. I think there's a lot of companies that are struggling, especially on the cash flow front, and then you enter bankruptcy protection, and then you're getting acquired maybe for pennies on the dollar. So there's a lot of, what else I hear and I see is there's a lot of good assets being acquired for very good price. So there's a lot of opportunity as well. Some companies are coming out on top. So that's actually going to be a talk on the agenda as well. So some of the opportunities that are emerging from all the consolidation. And some of those companies coming are going to have their CEOs and CFOs speaking about it. So I'm looking forward to what they have to say about it. But yeah, definitely there's a lot more of that. And it's interesting as well, I will say, this industry versus other industries. So I remember when e-commerce was a relatively new industry, and we were doing an event for e-commerce in San Francisco, and nobody really cared that much about profitability from a lot of these companies, especially the tech companies. They were more focused on, hey, this is a totally new industry. This could 10x, 20x, 30x in the next 5-6 years, and the potential is exponential. And so I think there was a lot more focused on that. So it's interesting to see how in cannabis it evolved very quickly to focus on profitability and margins. as opposed to growth and innovation. And
Right. That was especially interesting in the sort of Canadian stock exchange companies. You saw really aggressive growth into, especially in the cultivation space. And it seemed very speculative, like basically who could grow the most in order to get the greatest market share, bring the cost per unit down, and hopefully then go into export. It seemed like, and of course, there's been a big pullback over the last couple of years on that. Companies shutting down large cultivation facilities and just scaling back, strapping down and probably selecting their sort of islands of excellence, getting the best producers, most efficient production environments, and backing those, doubling down. Were there any major sort of lessons from the business cycle that you were hearing from folks in these really largest companies? Did they take away something from those boom bust cycles that they think is going to really be extremely relevant as we go into an international global market and new countries start to open up markets?
For sure. I think a word I hear a lot about is flexibility. I think being able to be flexible, being able to accommodate ups and downs, and being able to change very quickly as well. And I'm talking about products that they may have. So maybe one product, they made too much or they grow too much. What do you do with that surplus, or how do you control that supply? I think overproduction and being flexible in your production is something that I hear a lot about. I think also having the right team, that's a discussion and culture, building company culture. I think is something that is becoming very important in cannabis. From what I hear, that's something that I'm hearing a lot now. I hear a lot of executives tell me that the culture is at the forefront, and a lot of CEOs are putting a lot more emphasis into having into culture. I don't know how else to say it, into investing in their company culture.
Yeah, and as far as that company culture, you mentioned before that you see a balance between people coming out of legacy market, long expertise in the business, versus folks coming out of other markets and coming in and sort of being looked at to spur growth or interface with investors from more of a conventional perspective, or take the finance eye and apply it to the industry. Is that, as we see these new emphasis on culture, do you still see that balance? Is that persistent to this day, even up to the biggest companies? Are folks coming from that long track record of background experience still sort of at the core of a lot of these companies, or has it kind of shifted towards more professional, executives from other industries?
I think you are starting to see a shift for sure. I think you are seeing a lot of people from the CPG space at the top of these companies. I think that's what you're seeing. I think you're seeing a lot of successful companies have a lot of these legacy people still there and be a big part of it. But you're also seeing a lot of those companies get acquired and get consolidated into bigger companies. But one group that I see a lot of now is companies from CPG, big brands, Kraft Foods, Jack Daniels, for example, Store Candy. I mean, big household brands or liquor companies. The tobacco industry, I find people from there tend to. There's a lot of tobacco industry people in cannabis, especially in Canada.
Which makes sense. I mean, it's a regulated product, has some similarities in distribution. So a lot of that background know-how of just how to get the product made, consistent, packaged, branded, and out the door to distribution to the point of sale. A lot of very similar critical know-how there, especially at the very top level of strategy. But it's good to hear that some of the most successful companies, you still have real experience and then that legacy background continuing through, whether they're at the top executive level or somewhere in that mix. It's that was always a concern among many operators, especially in the U.S. starting out, as we saw federal legalization. Canada is does this just mean all the money is just going to go to the big corporations and meaning existing corporations, and there's not going to be an upwelling of success from the roots? So hearing that there's a balance is great, but also understanding that big companies just at a certain scale of distribution, there's a level of expertise and often academic background and training that goes with perfecting those strategies and supply chain management and all of that. And the flexibility that you mentioned earlier, that's really interesting to hear. It's something that we've sort of had a lot of conversations with larger companies about in particular, is that there's been a very back and forth in terms of the view of these companies in terms of whether they need to be looking at this as kind of like a just-in-time manufacturing approach, or build only as much capacity as you plan on using and maxing out for distribution, versus an approach where you need to be able to soak up excesses and hit a peak production capacity to match what the highest throughput that you could need is, so that when that time comes and say you have a huge harvest, you produce 30% more than you even expected to, you don't have outlets for that much flour, well, you can put that into a durable good, go into an oil that you can then make into edibles or send out to vapes or send out as a dabbable product, much more shelf stable. So that shift back towards flexibility and building your business around adaptability, especially around product types, that's very interesting to hear. And it definitely feels like a circling back to conversations. And it also mirrors the hemp industry. I wonder, do you see much cross-pollination between the cannabis industry in Canada and the sort of more internationalized hemp market, CBD market?
For sure, to a degree. We actually have some hemp companies coming out. I know that I have MC Nutraceuticals speaking on the program, and that hemp, the category, just as a foot in the door or as a potential product category to enter into, is a road to profitability or an entry into emerging markets. And it really goes in with the health and wellness category. So the hemp market is interesting, and a lot of my attendees would like to learn more about it, especially in the US, because there's a lot of successful hemp companies there. I think there are similarities as well in terms of, you're deriving it. Maybe the equipment is similar or the processes are similar, and then the products can be similarly marketed as well. I think hemp is also maybe an easier way to get in, but it's interesting as well to see the discussions around hemp for the European market. So far, it's predominantly been health and wellness focused, though, not so much recreational. I will say that that's a big difference. When we talk about hemp, it's almost always health and wellness.
And that's it. It is interesting to see how the sort of more national level, international level companies like you see in Canada, how they feel about what is going on in the United States, where there has been a line of we could say recreational hemp products with some of the legal precedents around THCA versus Delta 9 THC, and some of these acid form THC products being considered hemp and sold essentially openly in states across the United States. And increasingly, we have heard also of Delta 8 THC products, sometimes regulated out of the United States markets, but appearing in Europe, sometimes even for the first time over the past year or so. But what we typically have heard of and consider to be sort of the existing business political climate, if you will, around that is that those companies and the recreational companies, especially larger multi-state operators or federal level operators, don't mix. But to have some of these larger companies saying, hey, we're interested in finding out more about hemp, can we get people talking about that, even if it's just health and wellness, to start merging those two markets a little bit more. It certainly seems like there could be a lot of lessons learned from and information exchange between those two markets, because they went big, they went fast, they really went into distribution across the US and then international very quickly. And the boom bust cycles have, of course, been huge, even in some senses more so than even the Canadian federal market for recreational cannabis. So I think the lessons to be learned there and some of the strategies from the winners could be very impactful. So getting a platform and opportunity to get that cross-pollination happening is really very, very valuable. So could you say just generally, and this may overlap with some of the conversation we had before, but I'll just, since we'll be cutting through here, we can feel free to repeat yourself if it makes sense. Yeah. So, what do you see as the common thread among the strongest and most successful companies in Canada? Is there a particular strategy, approach, or even culture that you're seeing as the common solid foundation for those success stories?
For sure, that's an excellent question. That's something that I've been trying to look for as well, and I don't know if I've quite gotten it yet, but I'll tell you on strategy, it's so diverse. You can have companies that are vertically integrated doing well, that control everything from the cultivation to the distribution to the retail sale, and they're growing and buying other companies, and that have a very different strategy. And then you can have a small micro producer growing that's focused on their product and controlling everything, but maybe outsourcing everything else. And then some brands that don't control anything but just the brand, and they're doing well. So I don't know if it's strategy that's the common thread. So it's definitely something else. But I think that the individuals, just from an individual level, I can tell you, I mean, just talking to these executives, they're typically focused on the long term. They're more interested in creating good products for their customers, the end user. And it's interesting. I was at the at a cannabis fair just yesterday. And it's really meant for the bud tenders and end users. It's a consumer fair with outdoor smoking. It's a lot of fun, and some of the brands, they have their CEOs in the booths interacting with customers and trying to some of them were very, very large companies, and they come to my event, of course, but they were also there, in the booth talking to customers at a very individual level. Very open to learning, what their customers wanted, but really being there. And almost all those ones are successful that I saw who had that approach to running their business. They were very, very much on the ground level, and I think it exhibits their passion for the industry. I think that's a common thread, if I had to say it. It's an individual who's running the company who is passionate about the industry and sees the potential for this industry as a whole and just wants to evolve the industry. I think that's key. They're not chasing a stock price. A lot of them are private. Some of them are public as well. So I don't know if that has an impact, in fact. So yeah, I can't think of another common thread. I was going to say the PR. I mean, initially, I remember in 2021, I'd be talking to PR teams that were maybe 6-7 people. And I think I don't really do that anymore. I don't think companies have those kind of PR teams. So maybe that's a common thread. There's less PR. There's less bureaucracy. Maybe that's a common theme at these companies. I think it's easier to get to a decision maker and talk to them, for myself at least. And maybe that's the same for you guys as well with your equipments, or anybody trying to do business with them. Maybe less bureaucracy is better for this business, but that's definitely a theme I've seen.
Yes, I mean, the ability to quickly make decisions and execute and have streamlined pipelines of information definitely has proven to be a harbinger of success for companies that we've worked with. And the more difficult it's been, the longer term. I mean, due diligence, of course, crucial. You don't want to be hasty, but at the same time, being able to actually act is invaluable. And to that point, I wonder, do you see anything, not necessarily around just the company itself, but around deal making or the way businesses are interacting with each other, partnering, or even just staying in touch with each other. That's a common thread among these, top level success stories, or even new entrants, and how they've gotten to establish relationships quickly in the business.
For sure, I think people are very open to learning, and they're open to collaborating as well. I think versus other industries, there is a much more competitive narrative where people don't really want to interact or talk to the competitors. Whereas in cannabis, they are, like at my event, they're very open to go on stage and talk to each other in a panel. And you don't see that often in other industries, whether it's CPG or an automotive manufacturing, for example, or oil and gas. They feel like they don't really want a knowledge exchange with the competition. I think a lot of Canadian companies view each other as potential collaborators as well, which is interesting versus other industries. And maybe that's the lay of the land. There's a lot of contract manufacturing that goes on, white label manufacturing, and then maybe an outsourced cultivation, for example. So maybe it's the lay of the land, but I would say this is an industry where people are very keen to learn and are very open to discussing their challenges with each other.
Which is amazing. I mean, I think that's really a sign of maturity in that market as well. In the Canadian federal market, we see different pockets in the States. It seems like there's some companies that won't even talk to a single other cannabis company other than at the point of sale. And that haven't attended a single trade show, or the executives are just completely head down. And those are often companies that don't see strong long-term success, versus companies that are collaborative, focus on deal making, or just even keeping their ear to the pulse of the industry by talking to others. So hearing that that's the case at the top level in the Canadian market really reinforces the value of that collaborative spirit and ability to be frank, have conversations, stay in touch, and then open up the deal possibility. Don't be trapped in your silo or unable to outsource production when that makes sense. And probably I imagine a lot of people, just when these high level teams have the financial wherewithal to run the numbers and also see where it makes sense to put dollars into contracting versus building their own internal capacity, because we've seen a lot of faltering from companies here in the States where they've tried to do too much internally and then haven't been able to quickly find trusted partners to follow through when they could have invested in relationships and really been able to follow through on more high level polished consumer products. So definitely echoes in my experience what you're saying. So one last question for you. With regards to CANEXEC coming up, can you tell us the sort of who, what, where, when, for those that are interested in the possibility of attending, how should they find out more?
For sure. I mean, thanks so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing you and Steve back at the event. It was great having both of you come out Absolutely. To the event last year and be part of the agenda. Really great contribution as well to the agenda, talking about your work and sharing your perspective. It's October 3rd and the 4th. It's downtown Toronto. It's a private invite event, so it is targeted towards C-level producers. So C-suite executives from cannabis producers, brands. This year we do have a few retailers coming out, predominantly very large retailers, the largest ones in Canada at least, and contract manufacturers as well. Lots of opportunity and great opportunity for them to be a part of the event and be part of the discussions. I think they offer a unique perspective. And those are the type of companies that come out. We call them flower touching companies. So C-level flower touching executives, opportunity to network with each other, learn from each other. The program itself, in fact, Emmett, I really put it together by having discussions with individuals like yourself or individuals in the driver's seat of their company. And that's how we come up with content. We talk about what they're facing or what they faced in the last 12 months, 24 months, or what they think they're going to face in the next 12 to 24 months. And so we come up with the program. This year, we're going to have a more interactive program with a lot more Q&A, more panel-based. So I'm looking forward to that. But the agenda itself looks really good. I've got some really good topics that we're talking about. The international market, I think, is the biggest theme, the emerging international market, whether it's Europe, Australia, Israel, even parts of the US. I think there's a lot of excitement about the US opening up. I believe we have 2 presentations solely based on that, looking at what's going on in the US market and what can happen if it opens up. I think those are discussions that are going to be very well received and very engaging. Another big theme, of course, is becoming profitable, and I think that ties into everything. If there was a macro theme, I think that would be it: being profitable and having positive cash flow. I think that's the biggest theme, and when I think about it, when I have these discussions, everything revolves around that. Whether it's going into Europe or the US opening up or any new market opening up, it's a revenue route and a route to sell higher margin products even. Or whether it's operational excellence, it's about operational excellence for profitability, right? So it's everything is really about profitability. I would say that's a big theme. Culture is a big theme this year. I think that's a new one that we didn't really see much of last year, but that's a big theme this year as well.
Thank you, Darwin, for answering all of my questions. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the international cannabis considerations. I'm going to pass it over to Steve Fuhr, our Director of Sales and Business Development. Steve, take it away.
Well, good afternoon, Darwin. It's good seeing you again.
Good seeing you as well, Steve. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, I had a whole list of questions prepared, and I actually wanted to hit and expand upon a subject that you and Emmett briefly touched on, and that is this concept of converting CBD to THC. It's a chemical process. I won't get deep into it, but it's actually how most pharmaceutical drugs are made, the process they use. And there's a story, it's actually a lead story today in Marijuana Business Daily, and the title of it is Curaleaf joins marijuana multi-state operators in pivoting to hemp-derived THC. Now, when you read the article, the main thrust of it is Curaleaf is doing this in the US in markets where the states haven't legalized THC yet. And there's a little bit of ambiguity at our federal level right now about this conversion THC, and they're taking advantage of that. What it doesn't mention in this article is that in many cases, it can be less expensive to grow big fields of hemp, pull the CBD out, and convert it to THC than it is to have a smaller grow of THC and pull it out from a THC centric plant. So my question to you is this: do you know of any Canadian processors that are currently doing these CBD to THC conversions? And if so, what effect do you think that will have on the traditional markets?
For sure, Steve. I don't know any companies that are doing that. If they are, I don't know about it, to be honest with you. I don't know. I've never, I didn't know that was a big thing. But what impact would that have? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. This is a very novel topic for me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know of anybody. That's why I asked. There's a bunch of people in the U.S. doing it, with Curaleaf being probably the tip of the spear. So interesting. So one of the first questions I had for you, Darwin, is what do Canadian cannabis companies have to offer these emerging international markets, considering, say the EU, looking at the EU as an example, in regards to product development and operational consulting?
Okay, for sure. And Steve, I think that's something that Canadian companies and the executives I speak to are very confident about in their skill set because of the experience, being the big country that goes federally legal for at least 5-6 years now. A lot of these executives have that over anybody else in the world now, right? And
right.
I think being able to bring that to the table does provide them with that confidence from the operational standpoint. I think legal framework, obviously, it's challenging when you're talking about a different country. The framework is always different. So I don't think you're going to see that much from that standpoint. That's not what I hear either. I think it's a lot of it is from the operational standpoint, both from cultivation, processing, production, manufacturing, especially. I would say I hear it more from the manufacturing side,
Right.
Whether it's turning cannabis into gummies for recreational or turning it into soft gels and pills and medicine. I think that's a big area. I think also in the research and development area, I think that's an area that a lot of Canadian companies executives are very confident in. There's a company coming to my event, Zentrella, that's been doing a lot of really innovative work and discoveries in the field, and it's pretty cool. I mean, there's a company that used to come as well, Maselli, that works with universities, and they're doing a lot of work on drug delivery formulation. So it's interesting to see how that area is evolving, and I think that's an area that Canadians will have a competitive advantage in. At least that's how they feel they have a competitive advantage in. Whether it's real or not, we'll see. I know that a lot of the companies coming to my event, the executives tell me that they're having a lot of success exporting into Europe and that their products are in high demand. Same with Australia as well. This is from what I hear, that their products are very, very high in demand. And in fact, I also hear from some of the testing companies, the lab testing companies, that Canadian products are coveted or that are viewed, as premium products, and that there's a demand for Canadian cannabis. So, will we be able to hold on to that durable competitive advantage? Is it a durable competitive advantage? I don't know. I mean, is it something that we can hold on to and maintain over other countries? I know there is, amongst the cultivation, on the cultivation side, there is, they know that there are places where you can grow cannabis for cheaper, especially large amounts outdoor, which is oftentimes what is needed for the processing of finished goods. And it's interesting that we have some Latin American companies coming out this year, and I think that's the competitive advantage that they're really bringing to the table, and that they will highlight to my attendees is, hey, we can grow your stuff for less. And so I think that's a sentiment that we're Canadians. I don't know. I don't hear a lot of Canadians talking about how they want to cultivate cannabis for less.
Right.
I hear the quality side for sure.
Right.
And the operational excellence side, especially on the manufacturing side. So that's the only area that I would say maybe there's a concern or that's something that might eventually be outsourced to other places.
Right. I know when I went to Berlin, to the ICBC event in Berlin this year, the last night I was there, I was at a table with, at least 20 Canadian producer processors, but the person sitting next to me was from Australia. And they definitely have a very vigorous market down there. It's interesting to hear. And they're feeding off the Canadian people, which leads me to my second question. Very often our best lessons come from our biggest failures. Are there any hard lessons learned or pitfalls that Canadian processors have experienced over the last 10 years that could help these international markets avoid some common pitfalls?
For sure. I think overexpansion. I think that's universal across any industry that I've been fortunate enough to see. From a front row perspective, it's always overexpansion whenever an industry is new, and you see it in mining and oil and gas, and then you get your ups and downs, right? And you get eventually supply outstrips demand, and what happens is the price has to go down, and then you get people losing their shirts because they didn't anticipate that. And I think people will have good case studies from some of the Canadian companies, that's for sure.
Right.
And it's going to be interesting to see. I'm curious to see how it turns out. I'm curious to see if people make the same mistakes, but it'll be interesting to see for sure. I know investor sentiment is very high amongst, especially in Europe and Australia.
Right. I know one of the lessons that we talked about last year and is going to be a big theme in your event this year is this, this myopic focus on growing when markets are new, and then suddenly they discover processing. And hopefully they'll teach these new markets to at least put an equal amount of emphasis on processing as they do on growing, Yeah.
And I think we had this discussion before, Steve. I think it was with you, but we were talking about coffee,
Right.
and you look at who's really making the money. Is it the coffee
Right.
growers or the countries that grow coffee, or is it the people that are turning those beans into Starbucks coffee or
Yep.
Avasa coffee or whatever? You know what I mean? It's oftentimes at that, the other end of the spectrum. It's rarely the commodity producer, the cultivator. And I think Canada is a high cost country to produce anything, right? So
Yep.
I think there'll always
I had that article last year in Marijuana Venture, and I think I said, people who grow coffee live in grass huts with dirt floors, and people who process the beans, live in mansions on Mercer Island. And so
That's right. That's right. And that's where you can create I guess a brand as well, right? Which is what, if you come from a CPG background, that's what you want to be focused on. The beer industry is interesting as well, and there's a lot of executives from the beer industry, and we see in Canada there was a lot of consolidation, and what was left were these craft producers that were focused on creating a very high quality small batch product, right? They can survive for sure. Their product is sold at a very high premium, but that kind of production, maybe we see that in cannabis as well.
Right. So you touched upon this briefly with Emmett, and I was wondering if you could expand upon what extent are you seeing the Canadian companies participating in these international markets right now, which I think you mentioned is picking up quite a bit. And in particular, what markets seem to be the hottest international markets that Canadians are focusing on right now?
For sure. I think there's a lot of focus on international markets right now, particularly Europe. I would say the majority of even just my attendees, I'm thinking of my attendees, at least 40% of them are already operating in Europe, and a lot of them are telling me that at least 50% of their revenue is coming from Europe. So it's becoming a big part of their business. Some of them are exporting, some of them are exporting actual flower, some of them are exporting their brand,
right?
And leveraging outsourced manufacturers and outsourced cultivators to get their product in there. It's interesting. I would say Europe is definitely the biggest area where people are doing business right now and want to grow their business amongst the producers coming. And I think Australia is also another area where companies are finding success and where they view a good potential for. I think those are the two markets. I think a lot of people are excited about the US as well. I will say that they're excited about the prospects of U.S. brands entering Canada and the prospect of that market opening up. I think if anybody asks what's the biggest potential market, the U.S. is obviously up there. It's a huge market. California itself, I don't know, is the GDP of California bigger than Canada? I think it might be, or it might rival Canada, right? Like, it's a huge market. So
right,
and it's become a sophisticated cannabis market as well. So the potential for collaboration, I know people have mentioned to me, and crossover innovation, and I know a lot of Canadians look at that market as well for inspiration. So it'd be cool if everything opens up, for sure. I think everybody would like every market to open up. There's also another market that gets mentioned a lot. A lot of people exporting to Israel.
The other market, there are a couple of representatives. In fact, I spent quite a bit of time with some legal counsel that's drafting the rules right now, is Mexico. Mexico's in an interesting situation where the U.S. Supreme Court, if I remember correctly, the Mexican Supreme Court said that cannabis is not illegal, but they're just working on the regulations right now. And there's some interesting twists, but that's another podcast. I know you kind of partially answered my question, which is what involvement are you seeing, with Canadian operators in the U.S., but more specifically, the big elephant in the room is this. We like to think it's impending rescheduling. Frankly, I think there's some question as to whether rescheduling will occur if the Republicans take the majority of branches of government in the next election. But let's assume rescheduling does occur in the United States. What impact do you see that having on Canadian markets, both, in the import-export world, and do you see us importing to Canada, or do you see Canada exporting to us, or what are you seeing?
For sure, for sure. I think it'll go both ways, and I think most companies are excited about it going both ways. And I think there's the same time it's more competition, right? There is going to be
Right.
A new market for growth, but it's also a new market for competition. And what's interesting, Steve, and this is why I'm excited to have this on our program with you, is that not a lot of people are talking about the competition aspect. And I think that's a discussion that maybe should be had and could be had, and is an interesting discussion at the very least. So I think already what we see is a lot of Canadians benefiting from some of these brands like Bang or Cookies or what's the other big edibles brand from, I think they're from Colorado. Is it Wana?
Yeah, Wana.
Wana, right? And
It's Chiba.
yeah, that's another one, Kiva, as well. These brands were able to give some contract manufacturers in Canada or cultivators the opportunity, right? Or the ancillary businesses as well, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of that, and it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, which companies come out on top, or which region comes out on top when it goes federally legal. I think it's almost like the battle of the coffee shops, right? We got two ones here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it goes and who ends up owning it all. But at the end of the day, I think what mostly gets discussed and is mostly exciting for the people in the industry is the opening of the global market. And that's why I call it the Global Cannabis Executive Summit, because I want it to have a long-term focus. I think it is impeding that the US goes federal and that everybody opens up eventually.
Sure.
And I think that's exciting time, because then you have more players and more opportunities for innovation, more ideas, more of everything.
Right.
And definitely more booms and more busts as well, right? So there'll be more of that.
Well, it's going to affect pricing. I think, my assumption is that prices will get more compressed as more competitors and bigger competitors enter a market, which actually brings me to my next question. And we talked about this briefly a few months ago. Canada does some things very differently than the US does things in terms of licensing requirements. What are you seeing as the top 2 or 3 competitive advantages that Canadian processors and producers currently have over even the biggest US manufacturers right now?
For sure. I think it's that experience in operating in a federal market. I think that's really what they bring to the table. That's what they feel they bring to the table.
Right.
There are some regulatory limits here that don't exist in, for example, California. Like I know that in Ontario, there's much more of a limit on the amount of THC you can have in a product.
Right.
So it's going to be curious to see what those limits have on Canadians trying to get into a market which might be used to a more potent product.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see. And what I see a lot in Canada, and I think we'll see this in the US as well, is companies that were catering to the food business, whether it's tomatoes or strawberries, moving into cannabis, and that level of expertise that is going to bring. Because these are crops that have been grown for many, many years, or products that have been manufactured for centuries, right? And so it's going to be interesting to see what that level of experience brings in with a huge market. Yeah, I think that's the level of confidence that the Canadians have in knowing that they were able to enter this federal market, maybe produce on a national scale,
Right.
and do so for 5 to 6 years. I think
The big one I was kind of the buzz in Germany is the concept that the Canadian manufacturers, or should I say the country, Canada, requires manufacturers to be what's called GMP, good manufacturing process, certified and regulated. And that's not been a requirement in the US. And one of the concerns is that in the US, when the rescheduling happens and the walls come down, that a lot of US manufacturers are going to be caught off guard with the high cost and the difficulty in achieving GMP requirements. And then to add to that point, in the European market, because every country has its own version of GMP, but really kind of the platinum standard of GMP is what we call EU GMP. And I know a lot of the folks at that Canadian table, I was at that last night, are really scrambling to meet those EU GMP requirements. Have you heard any buzz about that subject at all from the people you work with?
For sure, like getting EU GMP certified is a topic on the agenda. It's actually a panel that we're having, and we've got. It's not, from what I hear, it's not the easiest thing to do, of course, and there are some success stories, and I'm hoping to highlight them on the program. There's one small company, privately owned, that achieved it, and then there's some larger companies, of course, that have more money, that are able to do it. But it is viewed as the gold standard for sure, and it is a focus. Some companies have been able to achieve it, and those that are entering Europe and have been in Europe. I guess if you can get in there, you can get in anywhere, right? And that's the sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, EU is the platinum standard worldwide, and even some Asian companies are requiring that EU.
Wow.
The other one that's interesting that I heard some buzz about is, in Europe, in order to produce a product, you generally need what's called a novel food patent. It's kind of like an FDA approval, but it's by product. And instead of taking an average of 7 years, it'll take somewhere between 12 and 24 months to get these. And what we're learning in this process is that companies who are doing a lot of research and providing data is key to getting these novel food patents, are going to be the leaders in this. And I'm wondering if you've heard any buzz on any Canadian processors that have done any applications or are preparing to do these novel food patent applications in the EU.
For sure, not that I've heard of. It's not been something that's come up, and maybe I should be asking them if this is something they're doing. That's actually a good point. I didn't know about that, but I will say that data and the emphasis on collecting data and leveraging data is more of a focus this year for a lot of these executives.
Right.
And once again, I've got 2 topics just on that, and they're either dealing with digital transformation or turning data into actionable insight. And a lot of it is based on collecting real-time data.
Right.
Whether it's with clever equipment that can monitor your facilities, or whether it's software that can analyze that data in real time and make it usable for executives. So that's interesting. And I guess Canadian companies are investing in that space. They really are. I mean, some of my sponsors are ERP companies specializing in collecting the data and turning it into actionable insight.
Right.
I'm not sure.
That is key.
Would you say that that's a big thing in the US as well? Like companies are investing in their data? I mean, is that?
It's funny you should say that. I did an interview with Cannabis Science and Technology a couple of weeks ago, and I made a comment, and that I'll just briefly share, which was, we live in a paradox environment right now in the US where on the one hand, the FDA says we want more data and information before we do rescheduling. And on the other hand, we've got professors who are going through all the legal steps for applying for federal grants to do research. They're getting the grants. And then the board at the university is terminating, they're firing tenured professors for trying to do the research that the government, the USDA approved a study. And so they want more data, but they won't allow us to do the data studies. And the other part to that paradox is that arguably cannabis is the most studied drug on earth. There are literally over 20,000 peer-reviewed studies in my latest research on cannabis throughout the world, much of it done in countries like Canada and Israel. And I think data is key, because for people to open up not just their legal markets, but for customers to open up their hearts to this product called cannabis, I think there's just, and for us to use it as a real medical tool, there's going to need to be more data. And it's where I see the biggest change in the US with rescheduling isn't just in markets opening up. The market that's going to open up is the stock exchange. And when US companies were able to tap into the same type of public money that Canadian companies were able to tap into, we're going to start to have the pockets to do that research. And that's what it comes down to, is money, really, isn't it?
100%. And I think you saw that in the tobacco industry even, right? Like with the research for the big pharma companies, and yeah, it is very much a narrative of capital for sure. And yeah, no, the R&D aspect is very interesting, and I think especially on the medical side, I find it's mostly discussion on the medical side. I think product development for patient outcome has been a topic on my agenda from day one of the event, again this year as well, and clinical trials and how to conduct them. And people are, one producer was mentioning to me on the medical side was how effective they've become in lowering the cost of clinical trials, which is interesting. So there's operational excellence on that side, right? So I guess they'll get better at doing this research. There'll be more money in it, so there will be more data, and that's all going to help open up more markets.
Yeah, I know when I was in Germany, people are just, that's all they can talk about is the medical use. And when I was on the panel there, the extraction panel, I made a point that a lot of people came up and mentioned afterwards that they actually liked. I thought I was going to make people angry. And I said, we need to stop talking about medical cannabis until there's a point where we can separate all its parts, test those separate parts, and then compound or put them back together again in specific measured doses that have specific outcomes that have been studied and verified and replicated. And they agree with that in Germany now. So hopefully we'll get there in the next couple of years.
Interesting, yeah, hopefully.
Well, Darwin, that answered all the questions I have for you right now. Are there any other points you want to add about the international market that you think we've missed right now?
No, I think we covered everything. One thing that's interesting is going to be, I think that I'm trying to get on my program is to get people talking about potential markets. And I've had these discussions with a couple of people and have this idea as well of markets that nobody's really talking about. Like maybe there's markets that are that none of it looked at. Like I know Thailand, for example, or is it Vietnam, as a low-cost operator, for example, or has it been as a potential market. India, for example, I know one of the producers that's coming to my event mentioned that to me is a very interesting market that could potentially open up. Japan, I just read something about Japan as well.
Yep.
So there's all these new markets opening up, and I think that's going to be really interesting and to integrate into the program. And I'd love to integrate more like product innovation as well into the program as well. I wish that would come back, but right now everyone's focused on margins. I know in the beginning that was a really interesting area to work.
Well, that's one of the things we talked about with the medical uses is I said, let's start with the fact that no doctor is going to recommend that you consume a product that has 4 times more tar than tobacco, which cannabis does. And you're going to be looking at delivery devices that are going to be like asthma inhalers. They're going to be transdermal patches for the skin. They're going to be translingual under the tongue. They're not going to be smokable products generally, I think.
Yeah, that's it. And it's harm reduction, right? And that's a topic on my agenda as well. And I have a vape company on there. I'm talking about it, and because a lot of people are using vapes, and a lot of people are still smoking, but harm reduction is a big thing that I think could open up this market to a whole new customer segment, right? And obviously, from a patient standpoint, you want to have as little harm as possible, right? So,
cool.
But that's something that's all the outlooks for the future, right? It's really exciting. But it's great to be at this, this front row. I always tell my team we're sitting courtside to this amazing game, right? And it's really great to hear perspective from you guys as well, who are very much in the arena, helping build products and everything. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to having you guys.
I will close. I'm sorry. Go on.
That was it. No, I just wanted to tell you I'm looking forward to having you guys at the event and seeing it this year and being a part of the discussions. The program, I like it so far. I like it a lot better than last year. So
good. I know we're looking forward to being in a room with people that make decisions
Super.
with people that are at the cutting edge of these markets and people that are as excited about the changes that are happening as we are. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
No, for sure. Thanks for having me as well. I hope I did well. I'm no cannabis expert, but they're kind enough to talk to me. So, and come to my event and spend some time telling me what they see. And I hope I was able to convey that in an effective manner. But
Very much so.
thanks for having me on this show, and thanks for doing this show as well. Like these this kind of content is great for everybody to learn more about the industry and ask better questions and evolve it forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you once again, Darwin, for joining us. This has been Darwin Fletcher of the Global Cannabis Executive Summit. You can find more information about the upcoming event in October at CANEXECsummit.com, where you can apply for an invitation if you are a C-suite level executive in a cannabis company. Really looking forward to meeting and speaking to all of the executives at that event, and especially to our panel led by Steve Fuhr as moderator, focused on international cannabis trends. And please do also find us at SciPhySystems.com, or you can reach out to Steve at SciPhySystems.com for any sales or business development opportunities. In addition, please like and subscribe here on YouTube. Find us at SciPhy Systems on Instagram, on Facebook and LinkedIn, or anywhere else you consume content. And please join us again for future Plants to Plants episodes, where we will be punching in on cannabis topics across the board, and especially some very interesting upcoming features for our SciPhy Systems equipment, be it butane extraction equipment, membrane processing equipment for butane, propane, and other solvents, or a large spectrum of other technology opportunities for your business to take your products to the next level. This has been Emmett McGregor, CEO of SciPhy Systems. I look forward to seeing you at future Plants to Plants episodes. And thank you once again, Darwin, for joining us.